So this is number 2 in our series of Navigating Judaism. What's going to end up happening is this class in particular is probably going to end up being 2 classes, because I realized as I was pulling the information together that there was just a tremendous amount of information to share with you about the Jewish holidays, and especially if I'm going to allow any time for questions at all, and I feel like there's probably going to be a lot of questions, that I needed to split it in 2. So anyway, so this is going to be like part A, and there'll be a second half to the class next week so that we can get all of the information in, okay? So like I said, there's just like so much information, but what we're going to talk about right now is the Jewish yearly cycle of holidays, okay? And they fall into basically 4 different categories, and I sent you guys a quick PDF with just some places that you can jot down notes if you can print them off, or if you want to type it in on your computer. If it's better for you to for me to send you a Word doc, let me know, and I can send them to you in Word as well. But anyway, okay, so the Jewish yearly cycle of holidays basically falls into 4 different categories of holidays, okay? We have the biblically mandated holidays. Those are the ones that we see in the Torah. All right. We have the rabbinic mandates, which are the holidays that all Jews celebrate that are almost at the same level as the biblical ones, but you don't find them in the Torah. But the rabbis have said that this is what we do as a nation. And the interesting thing is I was talking to somebody just today about the concept of community. And I think that the rest of the world does not understand the concept of community the way the Jewish people understand the concept of community. And really, we create communities that are almost in a way kind of like a family unit. And so part of the reason that we have all of these traditions, and a lot of people, especially coming out of Christianity, like to poo-poo, the traditions of men. But these traditions, which make us into a community, are what has preserved us throughout the generations of persecutions and things that have been done to us. If we didn't have a unique way of being, a unique way of speaking, a unique way of eating, a unique way of observing the way the year works out, even though some of these things may even seem like they're leaning in, especially when you talk about the Eastern European traditions, you might even have some things that we would say are leaning in the direction of superstitions. And yet it's all of these together that created this concept of belonging and community that's preserved us throughout the generations. So there's a tremendous amount of value to the fact that we have not only the biblically mandated holidays, but we also have these seasons or these periods of time that we observe that God didn't tell us to, but that our spiritual leaders have told us to, and that we do as a community, as a group, okay? So we have the biblically commanded holidays. We have the rabbinically mandated holidays. We have holidays from Jewish history. That's probably where most of our fast days would fall into that category. There's a couple of holidays that fall into that category, like Hanukkah falls into that category. So we have the Jewish history holidays, and then we have a couple of holidays that are the modern state of Israel holidays, right? So those are more like secular, except that you can't really separate the Jewish nation from the faith, even though many people are not observant. Still, even in Israel, you can see this. When you get onto a bus in Israel, okay, public bus, has nothing to do with religion at all, right? There's a sticker. When you come on the bus, you know how you always have the driver, and then there's like a plexiglass kind of half wall, one behind the driver and usually one between the door and the first seat of the bus, right? On the one between the door and the first seat of the bus is a sign that it says in Hebrew, but it's a quote from the Tanakh that says that you shall rise in the presence of your elders. And what it means is that that you should get up for old people, basically give these seats. These seats are primarily for people who are older or handicapped or whatever. But you see it just so much in Israeli culture. it's a scripture, it's a passage of scripture, a quote from scripture, and yet it's on a bus in a secular setting. And that's because even when the Jewish people are not observing, I mean, it's more of a problem outside of Israel because so many Jews have lost touch with even that they're Jewish. You know how many hundreds of thousands or millions maybe even of Jewish people don't even know they're Jewish? And that's not counting the ones like from whom it was like really hidden or stolen, like some of the Jews of Spanish descent. I'm just talking about American Jews who 2 generations, 3 generations after the family stopped observing, they know they're Jewish, but they don't even know what that means. You know, that's like saying I'm Italian or you know, my family background is German or English or whatever. But in Israel, we see that even in the secular culture, so much of our faith is just intertwined in the culture, and it's absolutely incredible. And again, that is part of the reason that we still exist as a people today. So we have these 4 categories of Jewish holidays, right? The biblical mitzvot, the rabbinic mandates, the Jewish history, and the history of the modern state of Israel. Some of these are fast days, and some of them are celebratory. So under the category of biblical mandates, right, we have Shabbat, we have Rosh Chodesh, which is the first of the month. We have 6 Yom Tovs, which Yom Tov literally translates as good day, but it would translate as holiday. Okay? So we have Shabbat, Rosh Chodesh, and we have 6 Yom Tovs or holidays. The 6 holidays are also collectively referred to as the Chagim. The Hebrew word Chag literally means a holiday. All right? But when spoken of in the plural, right, if you hear somebody saying after the Chagim usually refers either to the fall festivals or the spring holidays. So the 6 biblically mandated holidays fall into 2 clusters. The fall holidays are closer together. They take place over the course of about 3 weeks. And whereas the spring holidays of Passover and Shavuot actually are spread out more over the course of 2 months. All right. But that's what's often referred to as the Chagim, either the fall holidays or the spring holidays. All right. Now, Shabbat, which is the first one that I mentioned, we covered last week, and that happens once every 7 days, right? It's very funny. Around Thanksgiving time, a lot of my friends who are all religiously observant will be posting about how, like, stop complaining about Thanksgiving. We do this every week. and it's really true. I mean, our Shabbat meal preparations, if you have family or friends coming, even though my kids are grown and they're not at home anymore, we still have one set or another coming to us almost every Shabbat, plus other guests. And so I really do cook like a Thanksgiving meal every week. Okay, so that's Shabbat. Shabbat happens every week. We talked about Shabbat last week. If you have any questions this week after I'm done talking, I'm more than happy to answer any questions that may have arisen since last week. The next holiday or category of holidays really is Rosh Chodesh. Now, Rosh Chodesh literally means the head of the month, okay? At the beginning of each month, the first day of the month, although some months it's celebrated for 2 days, and I'll explain why in a minute. Some months it's 2 days, months it's 1 day. But in the case of the months where there are 2 days, okay, of Rosh Chodesh, the first day of Rosh Chodesh is actually the last day of the previous month. All right. So like my daughter was born on Rosh Chodesh Adar, the month of Adar. Okay. Adar is the month that Purim happens. Okay. But her birthday is not the first day of Adar. Her birthday is actually the 30th day of Shvat, which is the month that comes before Adar. All right. So Rosh Chodesh Adar is the 30th of Shvat and the 1st of Adar. And I'll explain in a minute why that is that way. All right. So for all of the months except for one, if there's 2 days of Rosh Chodesh, the first one is the last day of the previous month, and the second one is the first day of that month, except for Tishrei. The Rosh Chodesh Tishrei is 2 days long, and it's the first and second of the month. Does anybody know why? Does anybody know what Rosh Chodesh Tishrei also is known as?
Rosh Hashanah?
Yes, exactly. It's Rosh Hashanah. That's exactly what it is. All right. And so I'll explain in a minute why that month is different from all the rest. But first, I want to ask a big question, right? Because, Rosh Chodesh is funny. Like Shabbat we get, but Rosh Chodesh kind of gets ignored. It kind of disappears into life. And so let's ask the big question first. Is celebrating Rosh Chodesh, the beginning of the month, biblically mandated? Right? That's a great place to start. So let's take a look. In the book of Exodus, Shemot, chapter 12, verse 2, we get a glimpse of the idea that the Jewish people were supposed to count their months. Okay, so that is that we are supposed to divide the year into time periods called months, and we're to mark each month. All right, so what does it say? It says, this month shall be the beginning of months for you. It is to be the first month of the year to you. Now, this passage in Exodus chapter 12, verse 2, occurred immediately before the Exodus from Egypt. It's during the passage where God or Moshe, God through Moshe, is telling the Jewish people about what's about to happen with this Exodus and what they're supposed to do. And God tells them that this month, which was the month of Nisan, is going to be the beginning of months for you. All right? This is the first month of the year for you. Now, you're probably saying, wait a minute. I thought Rosh Hashanah was the beginning of the year. Well, it is, and I'll explain to you in a minute, because there are actually 4 New Years in the Jewish calendar, all right? But we'll get back to that in a second. So here we see the commandment to mark the months beginning with the first day of the month of Nisan, all right? Now, the new month was marked by the reappearance of the moon, or what we call the new moon, right? The moon gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller in the sky, and then it disappears for a day or two, right? Because of the rotation of the moon and the earth and the sun and all of that jazz. And I'm no scientist, so I'm not going to get any more detailed than that. But the moon gets smaller and smaller and smaller. It disappears for a day or two, and then it starts to get bigger and bigger and bigger again until we see half the moon, which to us looks like a whole moon because it's a whole circle. All right. So in ancient times, being able to declare the beginning of a month was not an automatic thing. It wasn't. Our calendar now is set, but back then it wasn't set. And so what happened was, when the moon disappeared, they would send witnesses out each evening to wait until they began to see the new moon appear. And once they saw a sliver of the new moon, they were able to declare that as Rosh Chodesh. However, because some people lived far away, and because maybe there was a night when you couldn't see because of the clouds, that is the reason why there were sometimes 2 days of Rosh Chodesh, okay? Now, the reason that we now have 2 days of Rosh Chodesh, because in a minute I'll tell you when the calendar was set, but this is why, though, Rosh Chodesh Tishrei, which is Rosh Hashanah, and it's biblically mandated that we celebrate it on the first day of the month, right? But we have people who live all over the world. And so in order to make sure that Rosh Chodesh is celebrated at the right time, it's celebrated for 2 days, no matter where you live. Now, something that I'll get into a little bit more next week is the fact that we have a custom, Judaism has a custom that, except for Yom Kippur, all of the biblically mandated holidays are celebrated for 2 days outside of the land of Israel. They're celebrated for 1 day in Israel, but 2 days outside of Israel. The exception is Rosh Hashanah, which is for 2 days both inside and outside of Israel, and Yom Kippur, which is only celebrated for 1 day both inside and outside. And the reason for that is because it's a 25-hour fast day, and it would have been cruel to force people who live outside of the land of Israel to fast completely for 50 hours, right? So they did not make it mandated for Yom Kippur to be celebrated for 2 days. But for Sukkot and Shmini Atzeret, which is the day after Sukkot, and for Shavuot, and for the first day and last day of Passover, if you live outside of Israel, it is observed for 2 days instead of 1. But if you live in Israel, it's celebrated for just 1 day. Okay? So, right, it was crucial. The Rosh Hashanah was crucial that it's be celebrated on the right day. So that's why it's celebrated for 2 days. All right. So now the Jewish calendar was basically fixed in about the 4th century CE. And therefore, the need for keeping 2 days was basically eradicated. Once they set the calendar, there was no need, because they weren't waiting for the word of witnesses to see the appearance of the new moon. It was calculated, and it gets adjusted from time to time. But the reason now that some of the holidays, some of the Rosh Chodeshes have 2 days instead of 1, has to do with the ability to add an extra day to adjust the calendar to make sure that there are certain holidays that they never want to occur on the day before Shabbat or the day after Shabbat, specifically Yom Kippur, because we don't fast going into Shabbat, and because of just the laws concerning how to prepare for Yom Kippur, there are things that we can't do on Shabbat to prepare for Yom Kippur. So Yom Kippur can never occur on a Friday or a Sunday. And so the calendar gets shifted 1 day here or there in order to make sure that that never happens. And what you'll find is that Yom Kippur occurs on Shabbat quite a high percentage of the time, partly because of the fact that it can never occur on a Friday or a Sunday. So if they're shifting the calendar so that it can never occur on a Friday, it's going to occur on a Shabbat all of the times it would naturally occur on a Shabbat, plus all of the times that it might occur on a Friday that they have to shift it, or that it might occur on a Sunday and they shift it the other direction. I don't know if they do that, but anyway, you get the idea. So, so that's why there's some months have 1 day of Rosh Chodesh, and some months have 2 days of Rosh Chodesh, and some months have 29 days, and some months have 30 days. And it has to do with adjusting the calendar so that our days, certain holidays, do not ever occur on a day that's not convenient. It's not convenient, but it would make it very, very difficult to observe. All right. So that has to do with the month. So, by the way, and I didn't put this in your PDF, but I will give you the link. If you really like studying history and you want to study the history of the Jewish calendar, there's a really great article on JewishEncyclopedia.com called the history of the calendar, and I have a link that I will send you guys that has that on it. Okay, but getting back to the question of, is Rosh Chodesh biblically mandated? So it says in the book of Numbers, Bamidbar, chapter 10, verse 10. It says, also in the day of your gladness, and in your appointed times, and in your new months, you shall blow with the trumpets over your burnt offerings and over the sacrifices of your peace offerings, and they shall be to you for a memorial before your God. I am the Lord your God. Okay? So that right there is a commandment that we're supposed to do something. We're supposed to blow the shofar, and we're supposed to give specific offerings on not just the regular holidays, but also the new month. Okay? So that is in, like I said, Numbers 10:10. And then in Psalm 104, verse 19, it says, he made the moon for appointed times. All right, so we know that there's some aspect of following the moon that is supposed to guide our calendar, right? We also have a passage in Numbers chapter 28, verse 11, that says, then at the beginning of each of your months, you shall present a burnt offering to Hashem, 2 bulls and 1 ram, 7 male lambs, 1 year old without defect. Okay. So God not only said that we were supposed to mark the months, and we're supposed to blow a trumpet at the beginning of the month, but that we're also supposed to bring special sacrifices as a nation on the beginning of the new month. So there is a biblical mandate to observe the new months. And in fact, we see in 1 Samuel chapter 20, verse 18, you have Jonathan and David are talking. David is running from Jonathan's father, Saul, right? And David gives Jonathan a plan, and he's not going to be at this dinner that he's usually at. And Jonathan says to him, tomorrow is the new moon, and you will be missed because your seat will be empty. So we know that during the kingdom of Saul, that the king would hold a special meal, a feast for the new moon, to mark the new moon, okay? So we have the fact that historically we see that it was celebrated, but we also have the fact that God commanded that there be special sacrifices and that there be, that we blow the trumpet. Now, we don't have a temple today, so the sacrifices, the commandment to make the sacrifices are not incumbent on us, all right? But you'll find it very interesting, I think, to know that Rosh Chodesh is given as a holiday for the women specifically, all right? Now, according to the Talmud, women are actually forbidden to do certain types of work on Rosh Chodesh, not everything, and it's, more strictly or more loosely observed depending on the community and where you're at and what you're doing and whatever. But Rashi kind of enumerates the activities that we're supposed to refrain from. And he says spinning, weaving, and sewing, because these are the skills that the women contributed to the building of the tabernacle. Okay? So, and then there's an explanation as to why that is. And it comes from the Midrash, okay? You get a hint straight from the scriptures, but it's our tradition that when the men of Israel created the golden calf when Moses was up on the mountain, that the men were the ones that took the jewelry and took the gold to make the golden calf, and that the women actually did not want to give their jewelry for this purpose. And so it's our tradition that the women were rewarded for not giving their jewelry for the building of the golden calf by getting this special holiday that really is supposed to be just for women, that women are allowed to take off, so to speak, and not men. But the question is asked, why the women refused to give their jewelry for the making of the golden calf? And this brings it around to why Rosh Chodesh specifically was given as this reward. I mean, we could have been given any kind of reward for not giving our gold jewelry. Like, one of the rewards we have is that traditionally Orthodox Jewish men don't wear jewelry, and women are allowed to wear as much as they want. And that's partly because of this as well. But what's the connection between Rosh Chodesh and women? And it's explained that, like the moon, so women inherently knew that just like the moon disappears and then it comes back, that Moses went up on the mountain, but that he was going to come back. And so the women had faith and said, no, we don't need to create a substitute for Moses. He's going to come back. And women are actually, very closely connected in Jewish thought to the moon. So the women were like, there's no reason to react out of fear. Rather, we can trust that just as God brings back the moon, he will bring back Moshe. And it's because of this that the women not only received a monthly holiday, but that it's on the appearance of the new moon that we celebrate it, right? So the woman is compared to the moon, again, in many ways in Jewish literature. She's connected to the moon. And, we know that our menstrual cycle is very similar to the lunar cycle, right? It's about the same amount of days, not for everybody, but, and actually the moon very much affects our emotions and our moods and many things. So women in Jewish thought are very closely connected to the moon, and that's why we're given Rosh Chodesh as our holiday, as our reward for not giving our jewelry for the making of the golden calf. All right, now, practical. Really, in real life, pretty much only the most religious Jewish women actually observe Rosh Chodesh as something special. So many of us just kind of allow especially if we're working outside the home, we just kind of allow life to get in the way. And it's like, oh, it's Rosh Chodesh. Oh, I have to say a few extra prayers today. And so only really the most religious women actually observe Rosh Chodesh as something special, but it's supposed to be a semi-holiday for all Jewish women. We're not forbidden from all housework, but the rabbis have encouraged us to not engage in whatever we can get away with putting off, right? So in ancient times, for example, laundry was a pretty physically intensive task. Of course, if you have little kids, it probably still is, even with a washer and dryer. But, it was an intensive task. So we're taught that on Rosh Chodesh, we don't do laundry. So to this day, most of us who try to remember to keep Rosh Chodesh as special in some way, we put off the laundry for one day. It's not the end of the world. But we don't do the laundry. We don't do the mending. Of course, I don't think women today do mending anymore anyway. But, many of us don't do ironing either. But we put it off. Also, it's customary in many communities for women to wear special clothes on Rosh Chodesh, and if they are of the means, to wear something new. So I have a friend, she can't afford to buy new clothes every month. And really, the truth is, who needs new clothes every month? But she buys a scarf. One scarf, it's only a couple of dollars, one scarf every month she buys. And if she, realizes that her collection is getting too much, maybe she'll gift some of them to someone else. But, that way she has something new that she can wear on Rosh Chodesh. Now, most of us can't afford to do much more than that every single month. But it's nice to have something in your budget, put aside. If you can make that your date night with your husband, or if you're not married, just make time to do something special for yourself. Try to coordinate it with Rosh Chodesh, okay? So we abstain from tedious chores and sewing and laundry, and in a lot of communities, there's also special classes that will go on Rosh Chodesh. They'll have women's events. They'll bring in special speakers, or they'll bring in a singer or musician or something to have special events, because let's face it, women, we're busy. We do try to have it all, right? If we're working, but we're also still taking care of the house and still taking care of the children. And there are very few homes, to be honest, where everything is split down the middle between the husband and the wife. And so women very frequently will deny themselves, some of the things that we really need to encourage ourselves to grow and to enable ourselves to have some time for us. And so that's why the Jewish community will often offer special events for Rosh Chodesh for the women specifically. All right. So it's actually really a very healthy approach to life. One of the things that I teach frequently is that you have to specifically schedule downtime. It's very important. It's important to our emotional and physical well-being. And if you don't schedule downtime on a regular basis, what's going to happen is you're going to end up getting sick because your body will take that downtime. It will force you to be down. And of course, it's going to do it at a very inconvenient time and usually in a very inconvenient way. I would rather schedule a dinner out once a month than have to be sick in bed once a month, wouldn't you? So that's Rosh Chodesh. What are the other biblically mandated holidays? The best place to look for all of the biblically mandated holidays kind of in one nice place is in the book of Leviticus, Vayikra, chapter 23. And there it outlines all the different holidays. So I'm going to read through this for you. When I do the video, I will put on the reference at the bottom of the screen so you'll be able to follow it. But, excuse me. I'm going to read this for you now, so, please bear with me here. It's quite a long passage. This is from Leviticus, Vayikra, chapter 23. So Hashem spoke again to Moshe, saying, "Speak to the sons of Israel and say to them, the Lord's appointed times, which you shall proclaim as holy convocations. My appointed times are these. For 6 days work may be done, but on the seventh day there is a Sabbath of complete rest, a holy convocation. You shall not do any work. It is a Sabbath to the Lord in all your dwellings." Okay, so the first one is Shabbat. Shabbat is considered a holiday. All right, it's a weekly holiday, but it's a holiday. Next verse. "These are the appointed times of the Lord, holy convocations, which you shall proclaim at the times appointed for them. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month at twilight, is the Lord's Passover. Then on the 15th day of the same month, there is the feast of unleavened bread to the Lord. For 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the first day you shall have a holy convocation. You shall not do any laborious work, but for 7 days you shall present an offering by fire to the Lord. On the seventh day is a holy convocation. You shall not do any laborious work." So that outlines Passover, and it's talking about the first day of Passover, the intermediary days, and the last day of Passover. Then it says, "Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the sons of Israel and say to them, when you enter the land which I am going to give to you, and you reap its harvest, then you shall bring in the sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest to the priest. He shall wave the sheaf before the Lord for you to be accepted. On the day after the Sabbath, the priest shall wave it. Now on the day when you wave the sheaf, you shall offer a male lamb, 1 year old, without defect, for a burnt offering to the Lord. Its grain offering shall then be, it lists the amount, whatever. So this is the Shavuot is called, Shavuot means weeks, okay? It's the Feast of Weeks. It is it says, when you reap the harvest of your land, moreover, you shall not reap to the very corners of your field, okay? You are to leave them for the needy and the alien. I am the Lord your God. So this is basically the first fruits, celebration of the first fruits of the harvest that's being brought in. But it's called weeks because we count 7 full weeks from the day after the holiday of Shavuot until we celebrate, the day after the holiday of Passover until we celebrate Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks. So you have Passover. It lasts 7 days. But starting the day after the first day of Passover, you start counting 7 weeks, and at the end of the 7 weeks, you bring in the harvest. So all of that time is considered kind of a semi-holiday, Not that you don't do work. Of course you have to do work. You can't, who can take 50 days off of work? But on the 50th day, the day after the 7 complete weeks, then there's this holiday of Shavuot. Continuing in Leviticus, Vayikra chapter 23, it goes on to say, again the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the sons of Israel, saying, in the 7th month, on the 1st of the month, you shall have a rest, a reminder for blowing of trumpets, a holy convocation. You shall not do any laborious work, but you shall present an offering by fire to the Lord. So that is Rosh Hashanah, which is also known as Yom Teruah, the day of the blowing of the shofar. And that one's very uniquely written because it doesn't give an explanation as to why. And we understand now that this is the anniversary of the creation of the world. It's actually the anniversary of the creation of man. So the world is actually created 6 days before Rosh Hashanah. But all it says in the Torah is that it's a special day of remembering and of blowing of the shofar. So it's our oral tradition that teaches us that this is the anniversary of the creation of the world. And that's why we are being judged, which culminates 10 days later in Yom Kippur. So this passage in Leviticus 23 continues. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, on exactly the 10th day of this 7th month is the Day of Atonement. I'm actually not going to read the whole thing for you, but at the end of that part, it says it is to be a Sabbath of complete rest to you. Yom Kippur is the only holiday that has exactly the same, plus a few more, restrictions that Shabbat has. As we'll note in just a minute, the holidays are almost completely Shabbat, except that there is an exception. All right, and then you read down on more in Vayikra in Leviticus chapter 23, and again Hashem speaks to Moses, and he tells them to observe Sukkot, and this last day, which is the day after Sukkot, and he explains that for 7 days you're going to present these offerings, and you're going to build this hut, and you're going to live in the hut. And then you're supposed to take, it says, now on the first day you shall take for yourself the foliage of beautiful trees, palm branches, and boughs of leafy trees, and willows of the brook, and you shall rejoice before the Lord your God for 7 days. So there are 2 basic symbols, if you will, of the holiday of Sukkot, right? The one is the hut that we build, that we stay in, eat in for 7 days. And then the other thing is the lulav and the etrog. The lulav and the etrog is a fruit that resembles a lemon, and the lulav is a palm branch and a myrtle and a willow that are all bound together, and we hold the 4 of them. We take them together, as it says here, the foliage of beautiful trees. I think it's also translated the fruit of beautiful trees. Palm branches, boughs of leafy trees, and willows of the brook, and rejoice before the Lord your God for 7 days. All right? You shall live in booths for 7 days. And why? So that all your generations will know that I had the sons of Israel live in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. Okay. So I'm going to just very quickly, I'm not going to go into each of the holidays. I'm going to give you just a slight overview of the difference between holidays and Shabbat, and then I'll open it up to interaction. And then next week, I'll start with Rosh Hashanah, and we'll actually look at each of the holidays and what they mean and how they're observed differently, okay? So now, the biblically mandated holidays are observed in the same way that we observe Shabbat, except that you are allowed to cook food and a few other things that are required in order to cook food, okay? So all of the restrictions that we observe on Shabbat are observed on the holidays as well, except that we are allowed to cook food and, as I said, a few other things that are associated with cooking food. Why? Why is it different? It says in Shemot, which is Exodus chapter 12, verse 16, on the first day you shall have a holy assembly, and another holy assembly on the seventh day. I think this may have been in reference to Passover. No work shall be done on them, except what must be eaten by every person. That alone may be prepared by you, right? So the difference between Shabbat and Yom Tov is that we are allowed to cook food. Now, this does not allow us to kindle a flame. That's still prohibited like it is on Shabbat, but it does allow us to use fire to cook. And so we can also transfer a flame that was ignited before Yom Tov began. All right, there are a few other things that you can do as a result of this exception, but it's not necessary for us to kind of like go into that right now. So before Yom Tov begins, we light a 48-hour candle so that if we need to use a flame, we have one to ignite it from, because we're allowed to use a flame on a holiday, but we're not allowed to ignite a new flame. We can only transfer the flame. The reason that we can do it is because a fire is often necessary to cook food, which the Torah tells us we're allowed to do on a holiday. All right. This is one of the reasons that when possible, it's preferable to have a gas stove instead of an electric one. In Israel, it's very interesting. It's almost impossible to find an entirely electric stove. It's also almost impossible to find an entirely gas stove, I think. All of the stoves that we have here are gas on top and electric inside. And the reason for that is so that we can use the stovetop easily on the holiday, because we can transfer a flame, right? And so you can turn the gas without actually igniting it with the electric, and then use the pre-existing flame to light the flame so that you can cook if you need to on Shabbat, on Yom Tov. And the electric underneath allows you to be able to set the oven so that you can put food in and out during the holiday. And it's different than if it was a gas stove, although I don't know all of the intricate details. All right. So that's the preference in Israel. Almost all the ovens are electric ovens with a gas stovetop. If you have an electric stovetop, it is permissible to leave it on during the entire Yom Tov, although most people wouldn't want to do that. But you can leave it on in order to use it to cook. Obviously, you have to be careful that a child can't reach it and possibly get injured. But kindling a fire includes extinguishing. So we can't turn it off when we no longer need it unless it poses an immediate danger. All right. So that's right now all I'm going to talk about as far as the difference between Shabbat and holidays. All right. So yeah. So that's basically all I'm going to cover today. Do you guys have any questions? Anything specific that maybe I talked about that you would like to go into more detail on? Go ahead.
Who's first?
You, Heather.
I was just wondering, as a non-Jew, what am I allowed to celebrate whenever it comes to the holidays? And what am I not allowed to celebrate?
So that's a really good question, and it all depends on who you ask. Okay. Just like we talked about Shabbat last week, and we talked about the idea that you know, keeping it exactly the way the Jews keep it, the rabbis have said that's not okay, but certainly remembering and doing some things in order to honor it are completely fine. And I think that most of the rabbis would say that a non-Jew who wants to honor the holiday in some way is certainly permitted to do so, but that you have to do something that a Jew is not supposed to do in order to make it clear that you're not. So, for example, you know, one of the biggest examples, even for people who are going through conversion, the rabbi will tell them, you know what, just go and turn a light on and off at least once during Shabbat, even if you want to keep Shabbat. Otherwise, because, you know, I mean, if they're in conversion, they need to be practicing and getting ready for, you know, becoming full-fledged Jews. still they should flip on a light and flip off a light. So I would say that, if you wanted, now something I didn't get into here that I'm going to touch on next week is the holiday of Sukkot specifically. In the book of Zechariah, it says that in the time of the third temple, in the time of the Mashiach, that even the non-Jews are going to come up to Jerusalem to offer sacrifices during the holiday of Sukkot. So, that is certainly a holiday that should be observed, but what does that mean? How do you observe it? Do you build a sukkah? Don't you build a sukkah? Do you, just make special meals? What do you do? I mean, Hanukkah is easy. Everybody can light candles. It's not the end of the, it's easy to figure out, right? But how do you make a holiday special and acknowledge that this, and this is one of the reasons that it's very hard for some B'nai Noach, some God-fearing non-Jews, to figure out, how do I figure into all of this? If I'm celebrating a holiday, it's not really my holiday. It's God's holiday, but he gave it to the Jewish people. And I want to acknowledge, God and what God did for the Jewish people. But then, it's kind of like, wow, that's like, what about me? Kind of thing. And
I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah. So it's hard. But to acknowledge, I mean, if you look in the Torah, there are a lot of places where God says, this is also the law for the Gentile who lives among you, right? The stranger who lives among you. And when it uses that phrase, it's not talking about people who have converted to Judaism, because once they've converted, they're a Jew. So it's talking about those who attached themselves to the Jewish people and lived, at least to some degree, in the same way that they did. Like Passover, I think it talks specifically about it says that no non-circumcised person can attend a Passover Seder. But I'm pretty sure that a lot of the non-Jews who attached themselves to the Jewish people would have gone through circumcision as well. I'm not 100% sure on that, so don't quote me on that. But anyway, so how do you celebrate? Well, Rosh Chodesh for sure. Rosh Chodesh for sure you can celebrate. Take the time to acknowledge that it's the beginning of the month, that God didn't create January, right? God created the Jewish months. Yes, most of them are now named not Hebrew names, right? They're most of the names that we use are from Babylon. But that was our experience. I mean, the entire Jewish people was exiled pretty much to Babylon. And it actually became a place of spiritual growth. Most of the Talmud was written there and written down there. That was a place where there were a lot of great rabbis that came from the Babylonian exile, and a lot of great concepts and learning and whatever. So, all right. So, the months have non-Hebrew names, but whatever, you look at the names of the secular months and they're named after Caesar and, whatever gods that they're named after, right? So, but to stop and say, okay, Hashem may not have given them these names, but he created these months. He created the months that go by the moon. He gave us the moon as a guide for those months. And, the moon is visible to everybody, whether they're Jewish or not. So as far as Chodesh goes, that still is guiding your life. So to stop and take time and say, okay, this is the beginning of the month. There's something you can look up. We say on Rosh Chodesh, in our prayers in the synagogue, we add something called Hallel, Hallel. And Hallel is a compilation of a handful of Psalms. That's all it is, from Tehillim, from Psalms, that we say, that we add to our prayers. So it might be something where you might choose on Rosh Chodesh morning to have a special breakfast, and to say Hallel. You can look up which, 6, 7, whichever Psalms it is that we say. And so that would mark the special day. If you don't work, maybe go out to breakfast with somebody, with your husband or your friend or whatever. Make it a special day for you. Not all of us can afford to buy something new every month, but we can all do something special to mark the beginning of each month. So that would be my recommendation for Rosh Chodesh. As far as the other holidays go, that's a really good question. And it's something I'd actually like to give more thought to. And maybe next week, as I'm preparing to overview each of the holidays, I'll think about, ways that you could make it special that certainly is permissible. Again, most of the rabbis who deal with non-Jews and B'nai Noach specifically say that, a Noachide can observe most everything. They just need to make sure that they don't do it exactly the way that a Jew does it. All right. So a little different. You might decide that electricity is the one thing that you're not going to stop using. You might not watch TV, you might not turn on your computer, but you're not going to not turn lights on and off, for example, or, not tear toilet paper, for example, or all of the kind of minutia that we do, but observe it more in the spirit of the day. So, for example, on Yom Kippur, you might choose to fast and pray. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't turn on the lights or, some of the other things that we wouldn't do, but I don't think that there's anywhere in the Bible that says that a non-Jew can't fast and pray on a certain day, right? So that would be a way that you could do that. But yeah, I'll give that more thought and see if I can come up with a better answer for you for next week. Do it? Okay.
Questions?
Yes, Jan.
First of all, people who are physically not able to fast, how do they handle the days that the holidays require a fast?
So we have, and I'll talk about this next week, we have 6 fast days that we observe throughout the year. Only 2 of them are found in the Bible, and only 1 of them is biblically mandated. So for people who, like, for example, I'm extremely, extremely hypoglycemic, and I have a condition that I get dehydrated very easily. So I cannot fast. And so for the 5, what we call minor fasts, 4 minor fasts, they don't have to fast at all. Just like, it's like, just acknowledge the day and then move on. You don't eat in public, but, so I wouldn't go out to a restaurant on those days, even if the restaurant's open. But other than that, you don't worry about it at all. The 2 fast days that are considered major fast days, one of which is Yom Kippur, the other is Tisha B'Av. And Tisha B'Av, which I'll get into next week, is the only non-biblically mandated fast day that is a full 25-hour fast, and that's because it's the remembrance of the destruction of the first and second temples. It's like a huge, huge day. A lot of calamities throughout history have happened to the Jewish people on that day. That is like a secondary judgment day to the Jewish people. So for Tisha B'Av and for Yom Kippur, there is a rabbinic concept that if you have 1.5 ounces or less of something to eat or drink, it is considered as if you're not eating or drinking anything. It's not enough to make a blessing on. Therefore, somebody who cannot fast will have 1.5 ounces of liquid or food alternating every 9-10 minutes, depends on which rabbi you speak to, throughout the course of the day. And that way you're never actually eating a meal, but you're keeping your liquid and food intake at a level that is manageable for most people. If somebody is so sick that is not going to work for them, then they are completely allowed to eat, because it is a Jewish concept. There's a passage in scripture that these are the commandments and you shall live by them. And the rabbis comment, you shall live by them and not die by them. So anytime that there is a health concern, a matter of life and death, that's why, we don't put out a fire. But if it looks like the curtain is going to blow into the fire, you put out the fire, right? There are exceptions, and you are allowed to break the rules for life and death. And with a child, the standard is much, much lower as far as what constitutes life and death. If a child is running a bad fever, you're allowed to break Shabbat in order to take care of them or take them to the hospital if that's necessary. The rules are a little stricter for an adult, but depending on the person's sickness, you are allowed to break Shabbat or the holidays in order to make sure that that person doesn't die.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Second question. I am transitioning from 50 years of Christian observance, and I know you've talked about it a little today, but could you talk some more about a person making that transition, particularly if there's an emotional attachment to the old holidays?
It's very tough. Obviously, depending on the aspect of what you're talking about as far as transition goes, we have to get our mind, adjusted to the idea that this is, God gave us these holidays, and they're a gift to us. And the truth is that Christmas and Easter, for example, which are observances of a special event, but nowhere in even the Christian Bible are Christians commanded to celebrate his birth or his resurrection, right? It's not in there anywhere. And so one of the interesting things about Judaism that I discovered a long time ago is Judaism is structured to teach us that everything on earth, everything we have, all of our appetites and all of our desires are to be channeled and to be controlled. So, for example, we control what we eat, when we eat it, how we eat it. We exercise restraint over our sexual appetites, over our physical appetite, food appetites. Everything is a reminder that God created us powerful people. It says in the Torah, the very beginning, God created man and woman in his image, right? And we know that God is very powerful. So what does it mean that he created us in his image? It means that he has given us the ability to control the physical world that we live in to some degree. And so we exercise that control over the physical appetites that we have. We also exercise control over our ability to speak. We have laws about not gossiping. We have laws about not just not gossiping, but not speaking negative speech in any way against another person. And so I think that one of the keys is to shift away from this idea that, it's fun, but this was something that God gave us. And so when we celebrate the holidays, we are connecting with God. And we have the Facebook group, so feel free to ask anything that you want. Some things I'll answer in detail, some things I won't, because I feel like that's more for the class, or if you're getting ahead, like some things are just like, wow, you guys are like so advanced, and it's like, let's keep it very basic and build one thing on another. Okay, so I'll see you around the Facebook group, and it was wonderful getting to see your face and to see everybody. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you next week.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good night.